All right, we're going to start chapter 14 today, which is campaigns and elections. We're going to look at some basic terminology. We're also going to focus on how elections have changed from the past to the present. And then we're going to talk briefly about the president getting elected and finally congressional members. All right. So, campaign tasks. When we look at then and now, we have media consultants and direct mail firms. Consultants create advertisements and buy airtime. So, obviously, as mass media has become more important, this has really taken up a big, big change from original to later. The big difference is what's really surprising when we look at when television came out. Your average running campaign clip was roughly about a minute to a minute and a half, whereas when today you look at them, they're just simply blurbs about 8 seconds. So again, that kind of reflects the attitude and the attention span of the voter that we really don't have any long uh, commercials really or campaign programs or slogans anymore. Okay. Again, one of the really big ones is direct mail firms design and produce mailings to promote the candidate or solicit money. And again, this is a huge advantage. Remember, because of the incumbents and the franking privilege. Remember, incumbents do not have to pay for postage on anything. So essentially, all they have to do, really, guys, is they come up with the postcard or the little adverb that comes from the mail firm, and they can literally flood their constituents with, propaganda and material to help them get reelected. Now, uh, other things that have come out, and these are really more of the modern concepts, we get polling firms. They survey voters on their attitudes toward issues and candidates, as well as run focus groups. And so, again, they come up with all kinds of different programs and ideas to actually do this. And again, remember, we need a sampling for it to be a good one of 1,500. And remember, it's totally random. They don't look at demographics at all, which, again, I think is kind of stupid. But again, that's my personal opinion. But they do that entirely random. And remember, a good poll will have a plus or minus 3% points or points going up and down in either direction. Okay. Now, when we look at political technology, of course, this is your era where it comes to the internet and tweeting and all the other crazy technological stuff that I am not really super savvy with. They get website designs, online advertising, online fundraising, voter targeting. And again, this has become a massive industry for the politicians looking at how to use technology to really help them promote their campaigns. Okay. Experts, believe it or not, they don't really know whether or not televised ads political influence outcomes on the election. However, to play safe, they constantly do it. Okay. And again, this is one of the biggest increases in money that we actually have is airtime. Airtime's incredibly expensive. And again, the crazy part is we don't really know if it's effective or not. Now, one of the things that's really interesting has been micro targeting. And what this is the study of consumer consumption and recreational habits, and they'll build databases for potential voters. So, in other words, again, this is something that a technological firm would actually do, where they would buy data up on our online purchases and other things. It's also called mining, data mining. Um, but they'll do this and they'll take the data mining information and micro target it and figure out, who actually would support which candidates based on purchases. And this does tend to be fairly accurate. And once they have that information, they can then bombard the online user with material. Okay, basically ad campaigns and everything else to gain support for their particular candidate. Now, when we look at the critical process, mainly what has to happen is first you have to get nominated. Once you're nominated, then we go to the election process. So, again, these are two of our steps in the critical process, what's called the critical process. Now, remember our terminology. We get the incumbent is somebody who's already in office and can use their campaign to actually promote this. Now, we also get something known as coattails. Okay, and this is a tendency of a candidate to win more votes in an election because of the presence of somebody who is a known individual, generally like the president. So, like for example, you guys might recall Trump before this election was running around and showing up at a lot of governors and senator campaign headquarters. In other words, trying to use his popularity to get voters to come out. This is what we call coattailing. Now, our last step as running for presidents, okay, we have PACs. All right. PACs can be formed by corporation, labor unions, or other special interest groups, and they can give up to $5,000. Now, again, PACs normally do this in the form of soft money. Okay. However, PACs can give hard money, but again, this is where the limitations really come into it. But there's no limitation on the number of PACs. So, for example, if let's say I were to support zombie Reagan for president, I could literally create thousands of PACs if I was going to support him and donate $5,000 based on these PACs. Incumbents, though, one of the bad things they have to do is they do have to defend their record. Obviously, they've done things before, and this is where they can find fault. So this is where you do have the advantage and the disadvantage when looking at the incumbent versus somebody new. Okay, because they don't have a previous record in that particular position, that can be an advantage if the incumbent has had a bad year. Okay, now when we look at Congress, Congress is going to change things a little bit. Believe it or not, since 1962, over 90% of House incumbents who sought re-election won. Okay, so when an incumbent gets in the House, they are entrenched. Okay, it's really, really hard to knock one of these guys out unless something occurs like a scandal or something crazy. Okay, now the other thing we look at is malapportionment, and this is sometimes a problem or complaint depending on how districts are actually drawn up. You can see in my little example here, one legislature in one region could represent 2 million people, but a legislature in another area could actually only represent 10,000. However, they are equal. And again, this is something that can be really important in local elections because you may not need the voter turnout or the numbers that you might in another region. Okay, so keep in mind, if you hear malapportionment come out, it's generally making a reference to the difference of actual people, but again, we have equal representation within Congress. Okay, now this one most of you guys are familiar with. Remember, gerrymandering is when a district is redrawn, generally to make it easy for a party to win. It was originally done to allow minorities a greater chance of representation, and what's really weird, the Supreme Court has come up with two different rulings on this. Essentially, gerrymandering is illegal if it benefits the party. However, gerrymandering is not illegal if it benefits a minority. And to me, this is kind of a weird one, mainly because by definition, then that would give the Democrats a bigger advantage in this, mainly because since they're the ones that represent minorities in most cases, they're obviously more likely to benefit from this. So that's one thing I do kind of think is unfair. But remember, gerrymandering is when we end up having districts drawn in bizarre and strange shapes. Okay, now the getting elected process. In 9/11, Congress fixed the House's size at 435, and again, the reason for that is it made sense because the growing population today, we would have like a super dome area filled with congressmen, somewhere over 50,000, I believe. Reapportionment, remember, is conducted with the census every 10 years, and then they will realign the 435 members based on that. In 64, remember, the Supreme Court rules that districts can be drawn to make one person's vote count as much as another's. Okay. Finally, when we win the primaries, we get what's called the sophomore surge occurs when newly elected members become very strong quickly. Congress members use their office to run, again, personal campaigns as opposed to the party campaigns. And again, remember, this is, again, where we get a difference between hard money and soft money. Remember, hard money goes directly to the named candidate. Soft money goes to the party they represent, and therefore it must remain solely for the party. Now, to stay in office, remember, we have two major aspects. You have one, the delegate does what his constituents want, versus the trustee who uses his judgment without regard for his constituents. Remember, a congressman has to act as a delegate more often than a trustee. If he acts as a trustee, he's going to lose people, and therefore he'll lose his vote and the position.